I was editing an article when the phone lit up on the desk. The room was dim, the curtains half closed against the sinking afternoon, and the sudden vibration startled me more than it should have. I glanced at the screen and froze. Mom. Her name looked strange there, bright white against black glass, almost as if it belonged to someone else. I let it ring once, twice, a third time before I finally touched the screen. Her voice spilled into my ear, high and cheerful, too polished. Eden, darling, I have the most exciting news. I pressed my pen against the notebook in front of me, waiting, bracing. Richard and I are leaving for Europe tomorrow. Isn't that wonderful? I did not have time to reply before she continued, as if she had rehearsed the lines. Oh, and we sold the beach house and the boat. Everything is finalized, the money has been wired, and it all happened so quickly. We thought, well, you weren't really using them. Anyway, it's done. Love you, sweetheart. We'll send pictures. The call ended before I could breathe. I sat back in my chair and stared at my laptop screen, my reflection faint in the glossy black surface. Behind me, the city carried on as if nothing had changed. Cars pushed through traffic. Someone on the sidewalk laughed too loudly. The hum of living, but inside something had shifted, something permanent. The beach house was not a commodity. It was the place where summers stretched like golden threads, where my father built the dock with his own hands, where the salt air had woven itself into my skin. The boat was not just fiberglass and metal. It carried my childhood, the smell of seaweed, the sound of water lapping against wood, the endless horizon I believed would never betray me. And now she had traded them like trinkets at a market. I closed the laptop, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment. No panic, no raised voice. Only a steady coldness settling inside me. I had known this day would come. Perhaps not the exact form, but the inevitability had always lingered at the edges of my thoughts. My mother was not one to preserve. She was one to consume. And when nothing was left, she moved on. I stood, walked across the small living room, and pulled a black box from the dresser drawer. Metal, scratched at the corners, heavier than it looked. My father had given it to me the last time we sat together on the porch of that house. The morning was quiet, gulls circling above the water, coffee steaming in our mismatched mugs. He slid the box across the wooden table and said, "Eden, this is for later. Do not open it unless something happens, only when you feel it is time." At the time I laughed it off, half amused, half worried. "What do you mean something happens?" He only smiled, the kind of smile that never gave away secrets. I thought he meant a dramatic event, maybe an arrest from his protests, maybe an illness. I never imagined the ordinary violence of a Tuesday morning heart attack. One moment he was in the garage changing the brake pads on my car, the next he was gone. And the box became a shadow in my room, a presence I could not touch. Until now. I placed it on the dining table and sat across from it. My hands were steady, but a pulse of heat throbbed in my chest. The lock clicked when I turned the small key. Inside were no letters, no photos. Only documents, folded with care, sealed in plastic sleeves. My father's handwriting scrawled in the corner of the top sheet. The first file was a notarized deed. The beach house had been transferred into a trust company 3 years before his death. The second showed the same for the boat. My eyes blurred as I flipped through them. 2 more revealed rental apartments in a city miles away, properties I had never heard him mention. The final document established Horizon Trust, a structure with my name at its center, my address, my father's signature, the accountant's seal. Every line was airtight, every detail flawless. He had known. I leaned back, the papers trembling slightly in my hands. My father had foreseen betrayal. He had not trusted her enough to leave anything within her reach. He had locked everything away where she could not touch it, and then he placed the key in my hands. I gathered the files, slid them back into the box, and reached for the phone that I kept separate. A second line hidden meant for one person only. Amelia. She answered before the first ring finished. Eden. She sold them, I said, my voice low. The house and the boat. Silence stretched a moment. Then Amelia's tone sharpened. Understood. Do we proceed? Yes. Quietly, I will call you back within the hour. The line went dead, and I stared at the phone in my hand. Around me, the apartment hummed with the small sounds of life, the refrigerator motor kicking on, the faint buzz of a street lamp outside. The world had not changed, yet I knew I had crossed a threshold. My mother believed she had erased me. She had forgotten that my father raised me to be prepared, to plan in silence, to protect without warning. I set the phone down, pressed my palms flat against the table, and let my mind run through the possibilities. There was no anger, no storm of grief. Only clarity. That night, sleep refused me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster as if they might spell out an answer. My father's voice whispered through memory. Some people do not leave Eden, they wait to be forced out. Maybe he had been speaking of her all along. The ceiling seemed lower that night, pressing down on me as I lay on the couch. I had tried the bed, but every time I closed my eyes, the same image returned. My mother's voice, bright and airy, announcing the erasure of my past as if she were telling me about the weather. The words echoed until I could not stand the silence anymore. I got up, turned on the lamp, and poured myself a glass of water. The city outside was restless. Car horns drifted through the cracked window, someone argued in a language I did not recognize, a siren wailed and then faded. The world carried on in its ordinary chaos while mine reshaped itself. I returned to the table where the box still sat, closed now, the key resting on top. My fingers traced the cold metal. I wondered if my father had known exactly how it would unfold. Had he foreseen Richard, the man who now clung to my mother's side, whispering promises of new lives and new wealth? Had he predicted she would trade memory for comfort? Or had he simply understood her better than I ever allowed myself to? A memory pulled at me, sudden and sharp. I was 17, sitting in the passenger seat of my father's truck. We were driving back from the marina, the boat hitched behind us, the air thick with salt and engine fumes. He glanced at me and said almost casually, "Eden, when people show you what they value, believe them." I had frowned, not sure what he meant, but he didn't explain. Later, I would understand he was talking about her. The phone buzzed on the table, startling me from the memory. Amelia. Her voice was brisk, focused. "I have started the preliminary checks. The sale may not even be valid," she said. "The trust documents are strong, stronger than she could have imagined. It will take time to move quietly, but we can undo this." I closed my eyes in relief, though it was not relief exactly. More like a slow release of tension I had been holding for years. "Thank you, Amelia. We will need to verify the buyer," she added. "Sometimes people like your mother find ways to cover their tracks with shell names. If she tried to mask this, we will uncover it." After the call, I sat with the silence again. My hands itched to do something, to move, to act, but I forced myself to stay still. My father had always warned me about rushing. Patience is strategy, Eden. Noise is weakness. I stood finally and walked to the window. Across the street, a man in a faded coat smoked under a flickering lamp. A woman tugged her child along, their steps hurried. The city looked ordinary, but I knew in that moment that nothing about my life would ever be ordinary again. The hours stretched. At some point, I opened an old photo album, flipping through the glossy pages. My father holding a fish larger than his torso, his grin wide and boyish. My younger self running through the waves, hair tangled by the wind. My mother in the corner of one picture, sunglasses covering her eyes, her smile not quite reaching them. Even then, I realize now, she was already elsewhere. Already searching for the next place to be. The images blurred. I closed the album and slid it aside. My chest felt heavy, not with grief, but with the weight of clarity. She had not simply sold property. She had sold memory, inheritance, the fragile threads that tethered me to him. When dawn came, pale light spilling through the blinds, I had not slept. My head ached, but my resolve was sharper than ever. I made coffee, strong and bitter, and carried the cup to the table where the documents waited. Each page whispered a foresight of trust placed in me. I traced my name on the Horizon Trust certificate, the ink firm, the seal unshakable. I whispered to the air as if he could still hear me. "You knew, didn't you? You knew she would try." The city woke slowly around me. Children walked to school with backpacks bouncing. Cars pulled from driveways. Life resumed. And I sat there, holding the pieces of a war my mother had started, a war she did not even realize she had already lost. Later that morning, Amelia called again. "We have identified the buyer," she said. A name that rang familiar in my mind. "I will explain when we meet." Her voice carried the weight of something more. A puzzle I would not solve until later. I ended the call and felt the first ripple of anticipation. This was no longer about loss. This was about discovery, about reclaiming what was always mine, and about the truth my father had hidden in plain sight. I finished my coffee, set the cup in the sink, and looked at the box once more. The lock clicked when I closed it, the sound final and steady. That morning, I understood something I had not dared admit before. My life was no longer divided between what my mother wanted and what I could salvage. It was now about what I would build, what I would protect. And all of it began with a phone call that was supposed to erase me, but instead ignited the beginning of everything. The morning after the phone call felt unreal. I had expected anger to rise in me like a storm, a rage that would sweep everything clean, but instead there was only stillness. A strange calmness, as though my body had decided that emotion would waste too much energy. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, brewing coffee, washing dishes that were already clean, checking emails I could not bring myself to answer. The black box sat on the dining table, immovable, its metal surface catching the weak light of the early sun. Every time I passed by, my eyes pulled toward it. Inside were truths I had barely touched the night before, proof that the world was not what my mother believed it to be, proof that my father had seen further ahead than either of us. I sat down finally, dragging the box closer. The papers rustled as I lifted them out one by one. They smelled faintly of dust and ink, though I knew that was only in my imagination. I read them more carefully this time, forcing my tired eyes to follow each line. The trust deeds were ironclad. The rental apartments, 2 of them in a city I had never visited, had been registered years ago. The certificate for Horizon Trust listed me not only as the beneficiary, but as the sole managing member. My father had not simply left me property. He had given me an empire in miniature, a structure designed to protect itself against exactly the kind of theft my mother had attempted. The realization was dizzying. For so long, I had thought of myself as someone who barely scraped by. A freelance journalist piecing together rent money from articles no one would remember. I had thought of my father's death as a clean severing, leaving me adrift. And yet here in my hands was evidence that he had prepared me for a life much larger than the one I had been living. I pressed my fingertips to my eyes, fighting the sting that came unbidden. It was not grief, not entirely. It was recognition. He had trusted me more than anyone else. The phone vibrated again. Amelia. I answered quickly, and her voice, precise and calm, filled the silence. Eden, I have looked deeper into the sale records. The buyer is listed as Terra Vista Holdings. On paper it looks legitimate, but something about the timing is strange. The name struck me with familiarity, though I could not place it immediately. Terra Vista. The words rolled in my mind, echoing against old memories. I frowned. I know that name. You should, Amelia replied. The company was registered by someone you went to school with. A face flashed in my mind. Dark hair, quick laugh, a friend from my first year at university. Tara. We had lived in the same dorm, shared long nights of cheap pizza and bad coffee, confided in each other before life pulled us in different directions. I had not spoken to her in years. It seems your father anticipated more than we thought, Amelia continued. I think he arranged this. Tara may have been instructed to step in if anything happened. The room tilted slightly, as though the floor had shifted under me. My father had not only locked the deeds into a trust. He had placed people in position, allies hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment they might be needed. I thanked Amelia and ended the call, though my thoughts raced. The revelation unsettled me, not because I doubted it, but because it confirmed just how deeply my father had woven his plans. He had trusted me, yes, but he had also trusted others, building a quiet network of protection around me without my knowledge. I looked again at the documents, tracing the seal of Horizon Trust. My name looked unfamiliar, almost foreign when printed with such authority. I had always seen myself as peripheral, as someone who observed life through words and stories. Now I understood that I was meant to be central, to step into the role he had prepared. The day stretched on in slow motion. I opened my laptop and searched for old emails, trying to find Tara's contact. I discovered a thread from years ago, half forgotten, where she had invited me to visit her office. Real estate, she had said, though at the time I thought little of it. I typed her name into the search bar now, and her company's website appeared. Sleek, professional, successful. She had built something while I had been drifting. I closed the computer before I could lose myself in comparisons. This was not about envy. This was about survival, about reclamation. I would contact her soon, but first I needed to let the weight of everything sink in. I brewed another pot of coffee and carried the mug to the window. The city looked ordinary, unaware. People hurried across the street, shoulders hunched against the wind. A bus pulled away from the corner, filled with faces turned toward their own small destinations. And I, standing at the window, felt as though I was balancing between 2 lives, the one I had been living and the one my father had left for me to claim. The question was no longer whether I could act. The question was whether I was ready to step into what he had built. I sipped the coffee, bitter and hot, and whispered to the empty room, I am ready. That evening, I pulled the box closer again and spread the documents across the table like puzzle pieces. Each page carried its own story, but together they formed something larger. I traced the signatures, the seals, the notarized stamps. My father had been meticulous. Every line was airtight. Every transfer had been done years before his death, leaving no space for challenge. I thought about the way he used to sit at the desk in the beach house, papers spread out around him, glasses slipping down his nose. At the time I had assumed he was paying bills or writing lists. I never realized he was building a fortress. I had not given him enough credit for the way his mind worked in silence. He never explained, never bragged. He simply acted. And now, even after death, his actions shielded me. I found myself wondering when exactly he had decided to take those steps. Was it a single moment, something my mother had said that convinced him she would not protect us? Or was it a slow accumulation of disappointments that showed him the truth? Either way, he had not wavered once the decision was made. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, and felt an ache expand in my chest. It was not grief in its raw form anymore. It was something steadier, a kind of gratitude mixed with sorrow. He had trusted me to carry his legacy, and I would not waste that trust. The phone buzzed again. Amelia. Her tone was thoughtful this time, less brisk than before. I spoke with a colleague, she said. If the property was sold under false authority, we can reverse it. The trust protects you, but there is one complication. I tensed. What is it? The buyer. If Tara truly was the purchaser through her company, then the sale may not need reversal at all. It may simply be holding. But if someone else was involved, we will have to untangle the threads carefully. We cannot make noise too soon, or your mother will notice. I thanked her and promised to wait for her instructions. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet, my thoughts circling the same question. Did my mother know about the trust? Or had she convinced herself that the house and the boat were still hers to control? The answer would determine everything. Night fell slowly. I lit a candle on the table, its flame flickering against the metal box. The document seemed to glow in the dim light, symbols of something far larger than I could have imagined. I wondered what my father would say to me now. Would he tell me to fight? Or would he remind me, as he always did, that patience was stronger than fury? I remembered once when I was a child, sitting with him by the water. A storm had rolled in suddenly, waves slamming against the dock, rain soaking us both. I had panicked, certain the boat would break free, certain we would lose everything. But he had crouched beside me, calm, steady, and said, "You do not fight the storm, Eden. You let it pass and you hold your ground." That memory steadied me. This was my storm now, but I knew how to stand through it. I began to write in my notebook, the one I usually filled with article drafts. This time the words were not for publication. They were for me alone. I listed every property, every asset. I mapped connections between names, dates, companies. I wrote questions in the margins, possibilities, contingencies. By the time I closed the notebook, my hand ached, but my mind felt sharper. Sleep came only in fragments. I dreamed of the beach house, of waves licking at the foundation, of doors swinging open to reveal rooms filled with sand. In the dream, my father stood at the end of the dock, watching me silently, and when I called to him, he only lifted a hand, pointing toward the horizon. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. The dream clung to me, vivid as memory. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the city stirring in the pale light. The horizon glowed faintly beyond the rooftops. For a moment, I felt as if he truly had pointed me toward this very morning. I brewed coffee again, stronger this time, and sat at the table with the documents. My phone buzzed with messages from editors, reminders of deadlines, but I ignored them. The articles could wait. This could not. As the sun rose higher, I felt a calm determination settle in me. My mother had made her move. Now it was my turn. I whispered to the empty apartment as if he could still hear me. I will not let her erase you. I will not let her erase me. The flame of resolve burned steady inside me. And with that, I knew the next step would be to face the past not as memory, but as a plan unfolding. The call from Amelia came early the next morning while I was still staring at my untouched breakfast. I had poured cereal into a bowl and watched the flakes turn soggy, unable to bring myself to eat. The sound of her name on the screen jolted me back into the present. I answered quickly, pressing the phone tight to my ear as if the closeness could anchor me. "Come to my office," she said without preamble. "We need to talk face to face." The ride downtown felt longer than usual. The city was gray and restless, morning traffic honking at every light, pedestrians rushing past each other without eye contact. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the cab window and tried to steady my breathing. Every nerve in me felt strung tight, but beneath it all was a quiet flame of determination. Amelia's office was housed in one of those renovated industrial buildings, all polished brick and steel beams, the kind of place that whispered of both history and ambition. I passed through the glass doors, signed in at the lobby desk, and rode the elevator up. Each floor that passed beneath me felt like another layer peeling away, stripping me bare. When I stepped inside her office, the first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh coffee. The second was the open folder on her desk, papers spread like cards in a game I had not yet learned to play. Amelia herself sat behind the desk, her suit impeccable, her dark hair pinned into a knot that did not move even when she looked up and smiled faintly at me. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone more habit than courtesy. "No thanks." My stomach was already twisted in knots. She gestured to the chair opposite and waited until I sat before tapping the folder. I verified the buyer, Terra Vista Holdings. The name pricked something deep in my memory, familiar but slippery, like a word I had once known but forgotten. I frowned. That sounds familiar. It should. Amelia slid a document across to me. "The company is managed by someone you went to school with, Tara Lewis." The sound of that name made my chest tight. Suddenly I was back in my first year of university, a cramped dorm room filled with cheap pizza boxes and notebooks scattered across the floor. Tara's laughter echoing against the thin walls, her voice telling me not to worry so much about the future. We had shared secrets then, whispered fears about our families, our dreams. I had not spoken to her in years, but the memory was sharp and alive. I stared at the page. My father. Amelia nodded. He must have reached out to her after the funeral. Perhaps even before. He arranged for her to act as a shield in case your mother tried anything. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the edge of the document. He had thought of everything. Not only the paperwork, not only the trusts, but even the people who might one day stand beside me. He had placed allies in positions I never even noticed. "So the sale is not valid?" I asked softly. Amelia leaned back, her eyes sharp but kind. "Technically it exists on paper. But your mother never had the authority to sell in the first place. Tara is holding the property in good faith until you are ready to take it back." A rush of relief filled me, but it was not the kind that made me want to smile. It was steadier, cooler, the kind of relief that comes when you realize you are not drowning after all but standing in water just below your chin. I closed my eyes briefly. "I do not want court." Amelia tilted her head. "You could win easily. She would have no defense." "That is not what I want. I want her to feel the consequence, not punishment. Court would humiliate her, but it would also give her excuses. She would twist the story until she was the victim. I want her to face silence, to return and find everything she thought she gained turned to smoke." For a long moment Amelia simply studied me, her fingers drumming lightly against the folder. Then she gave a small nod. "Consequences, not punishment. Understood." She closed the folder with a quiet snap that felt like a gavel striking wood. "Then we move quietly. We will reverse the transfer, secure all assets under Horizon Trust, and lock the structure so she cannot touch it again. By the time she returns, she will find herself standing outside her own life." Her words slid into me like steel rods, bracing my spine. I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. Later that day, when the sky had turned a pale winter blue, I dialed a number I had not used in years. My hands shook slightly as I pressed the digits. The line rang once, twice, then clicked alive. Eden, a voice exclaimed, warm and familiar. "It has been forever." I swallowed hard. "Tara." She laughed softly, and in that laugh I heard echoes of our youth, nights spent talking until dawn, confessions whispered in the dark. "I never thought I would be calling you about something like this," I admitted. "I know," she said gently. "Your father came to me right after the funeral. He asked me to be ready just in case. I promised him I would. I never told you because he asked me not to. But Eden, I am glad I could help." Gratitude swelled in my chest, so strong it made my throat ache. "Thank you, Tara, truly." We spoke a little longer about her business, about the years that had passed, but underneath every word was the weight of loyalty I had not known was still there. She had been guarding my legacy in silence, waiting for a day neither of us wanted but both of us were prepared for. When I hung up, the apartment seemed both smaller and larger at once. Smaller because I realized how narrow my life had been, larger because I could suddenly see the network my father had woven around me. He had not abandoned me to face her alone. He had left me a quiet army. I pulled my notebook closer and began to sketch out the plan. Reversal paperwork, property lock. Communication with Tara, monitoring the trust accounts. The words filled the page quickly, each line steadier than the last. I felt myself changing with every stroke of the pen. No longer drifting, no longer waiting, acting. That night, as I stood at the window watching the city lights blur in the wind, I imagined her somewhere across the ocean. I pictured her in an airport lounge, champagne flute in hand, smiling for photographs that she would post online. I let the image settle and felt no rage, only clarity. She was writing a chapter that would collapse beneath her. All I needed to do was let time do its work. I whispered to the glass, my reflection sharp against the dark outside. You will learn. The following days blurred into a rhythm of quiet preparation. I woke early, brewed bitter coffee, and spread the documents across my table as though they were maps to a hidden country. Every time I touched the paper, I felt my father's presence, steadying me. He had not left instructions in words, but the structure itself was his guidance. Amelia called me twice a day, each conversation brisk and precise. The reversal paperwork is moving forward, she told me. County offices can be slow, but I have ways of making them faster. By the end of the week, the house and the boat will be sealed under Horizon Trust. She spoke of deeds and filings, of signatures and stamps, but beneath all of it I heard her respect. Respect for the plan my father had built, and for the way I had chosen to handle it. Tara checked in as well. Her voice carried a warmth I had not realized I missed. She explained how she had stepped in at the last moment, how she signed the papers as if she were any other buyer, knowing all the while that she was holding the property for me. She said my father had asked her not to tell me, not until it was necessary. I could hear the weight of that promise in her voice. I wrote everything down. Every call, every detail, every date. My notebook filled with neat lines of ink, a record of the silent counterattack. Writing made me feel anchored, as if the act itself kept chaos at bay. At night, I scrolled through social media, something I usually avoided. There she was, my mother, posting photographs from airports and restaurants. In one picture, she wore oversized sunglasses, her lips painted red, Richard's arm wrapped around her shoulders. The caption read, "New chapter, new life, wish you were here." My jaw tightened as I read the words, "Wish you were here." She had no idea how hollow they sounded. I did not comment. I did not react. I let her believe whatever story she needed. That was part of the plan. She thought I was broken, licking my wounds, powerless. She would return to find the silence waiting for her like a locked door. In the quiet hours, when the city fell still and the hum of traffic softened, I felt the strangest calm. I expected to be furious. Instead, I felt clean, as if anger had burned itself out, leaving only focus behind. My father used to say that rage is loud but fragile. Patience, on the other hand, is indestructible. One night, while writing at my desk, I remembered a conversation we once had. I had been 20, frustrated with him for not confronting my mother about something she had done. "You let her walk all over you," I snapped. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Some people do not change because you shout at them, Eden. They only change when silence shows them the cost." I had rolled my eyes back then, impatient and angry. But now, years later, I understood exactly what he meant. By the end of the week, Amelia called with confirmation. Everything has been secured. The reversal is complete, the trust locked, the properties sealed. Legally, she has nothing. The relief that spread through me was steady and cool. It was not triumph. It was not victory. It was simply the quiet knowledge that I had held my ground. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. She was across the ocean now, lost in champagne and photographs. But eventually she would return. And when she did, she would discover that her story had already collapsed without her knowing. That night, I drove out of the city. I wanted to see the beach house with my own eyes, even if I could not yet step inside. The highway stretched dark and endless, headlights slicing through the night. The closer I came to the coast, the more the air changed, salt riding the wind, sharp and familiar. I parked near the old gravel path and sat in the car for a long moment. The house loomed in the distance, pale against the moonlight, windows dark. I could almost see my father standing on the porch, waiting with that patient smile. I rolled down the window and let the sea air fill the car. It smelled of pine and brine, of summers long gone, of promises not yet broken. I whispered into the night, soft enough that only the wind could hear, "I will protect it." When I finally drove back toward the city, the horizon behind me glowed faintly with dawn. I felt steady, ready. This was only the first move in a longer game. She would learn, not through shouting, not through courtrooms, but through silence pressing down on her like the tide. The first picture arrived when I least expected it. I had been sitting at my desk editing notes for an article I would probably never finish when the notification chimed on my phone. I picked it up, thinking it was an email from an editor, and instead saw her name. My mother. She had tagged me in a photo, though I knew it was not meant for me. She rarely posted things with me in mind, but this time she made sure my name was attached. In the picture, she stood in an airport lounge, a flute of champagne in her hand, Richard beside her grinning like a man who believed the world was finally his. Her sunglasses were oversized, covering half her face, but the tilt of her chin was unmistakable. She looked like a woman at the beginning of a film, the kind where everything is still bright before the unraveling begins. The caption read, "Off to Europe. New life, new beginning. Wish you were here." The word stabbed, not because I wished I was there, but because she pretended to believe I might. I set the phone down on the desk and stared at the black screen. The city outside continued its restless hum, cars honking, people shouting, life pressing forward. I refused to give her what she wanted. No reaction, no comment, no message. Silence would be my only response. More photos followed. A week became a stream of curated images. My mother in front of a castle in Scotland, her scarf blowing dramatically in the wind. Richard holding a glass of wine in Spain, his grin wide enough to split his face. Both of them posing in Lisbon, coffee cups on the table, plates of pastries half-eaten, their smiles rehearsed and polished for an audience of people who did not know the truth. Each caption glittered with exclamation points. Our real adventure begins. Love and laughter forever. Starting fresh. I watched without watching, scrolling past each post quickly, but letting the images burn themselves into my mind. She had always been a performer, playing to whatever crowd she could gather, convincing herself that applause equaled love. Now she had Richard as her co-star, and together they believed they were untouchable. But even performances have cracks. At night, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook open. I wrote down the dates of every post, the locations tagged, the words she chose. I was not stalking her, not really. I was recording evidence of a story she was writing for herself, a story that would not hold. Beneath every caption I heard the hollowness. Beneath every smile I sensed the desperation. Amelia's voice on the phone kept me grounded. The reversal is moving forward, she said one morning. The county clerk has filed the deed under Horizon Trust again. The boat title has been restored. It is only a matter of time before everything is sealed. She spoke in the calm, precise way of someone who dealt with legal storms every day. I listened carefully, making notes, feeling the slow build of security around me. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining her sipping champagne in a gilded hotel, believing she had won. My chest tightened at the thought. She thought she had erased me. She thought the story was hers to write. But she did not know that every line she wrote was being crossed out in silence, every boast undermined by the quiet strength my father had left behind. Then came the call from Tara. Her voice was soft but steady. "Eden, I thought you should know. A colleague of mine saw Richard last night in Lisbon. He was at a hotel bar, not alone, with a young woman." The words landed like a stone in my chest. For a moment, I could not breathe. Not because I pitied my mother, but because I recognized the inevitability. Of course. Richard was always looking for the next prize, the next glittering distraction. My mother was simply another chapter for him to abandon. "Thank you," I told Tara, keeping my voice flat. She hesitated as if she wanted to say more, then let me go. That night, I sat in the dark, the glow of the city leaking in through the blinds. I thought about her face when she realized Richard was slipping away. I thought about the silence of her hotel room, the empty side of the bed, the sound of her own breath as she waited for a door that never opened. It did not make me happy. It did not make me sad. It only confirmed what I already knew. She was not building a life. She was staging a performance. And the performance was ending. The next photo she posted was different. She stood alone in front of a cathedral, her smile thin, her body angled strangely as if she was unsure of how to hold herself. The caption read, "Exploring solo today," complete with a forced smiley face. Richard was gone from the frame. For the first time, her words sounded defensive, as though she wanted to convince not only her audience but herself. I set the phone down carefully, almost gently. The unraveling had begun. Instead of joy, I felt a deep calm settle over me. She was halfway across the world, her carefully built image cracking. Meanwhile, I was here, holding the fortress my father had left me, waiting in silence. For the first time in years, I felt the balance tilt in my favor. The unraveling did not take long. For a few days, the silence on her account was louder than any words she could have written. No castles, no markets, no romantic dinners staged for strangers. Just emptiness, like a curtain falling between acts. I knew her well enough to understand what that silence meant. She was scrambling, trying to hold on to Richard, trying to stitch together the edges of a life that was slipping out of her hands. Then one night, while I was writing at my kitchen table, my phone lit up with a new post. The photograph was poorly lit, taken in a hotel bathroom mirror. My mother's hair was pulled back roughly, no makeup to cover the shadows beneath her eyes. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that looked stapled onto her face. The caption said, "Travel is exhausting but worth it." I stared at the image, unable to look away. For years she had performed perfection, carefully crafting herself into someone untouchable. And here, for the first time, she looked human. The fragility seeped through the screen, unintentional and raw. I put the phone down and closed my notebook. I did not want to feel sorry for her. Sympathy was dangerous, a door that could swing wide open if I was not careful. But deep inside, a small ache stirred. She had spent so long running from reality that when it finally caught her, she looked unrecognizable. 2 days later, Tara called me again. "Eden, I think you should prepare. Richard is gone, he left her." The words were delivered without drama, simple and clean. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Gone. Yes, he met someone else. A young backpacker from Marseille. They were seen together at the port, boarding a ferry. He drained what was left of their shared account before disappearing. The inevitability of it made my chest hollow. I thanked Tara, ended the call, and sat in the stillness. My mother, who believed she could trade love like currency, had been left with nothing but debts and photographs. That night I dreamed of the beach house again. The water rose higher and higher against the walls, waves slamming until the glass cracked. But when I looked inside, it was empty. No furniture, no voices, only silence. I woke with my heart pounding and the taste of salt on my tongue. Days later, the final proof appeared online. A blurry photo uploaded and then deleted within minutes, but not before I saw it. My mother sitting alone at a cafe, a cheap coat thrown over her shoulders, her eyes downcast. The caption read simply, "Trying to figure things out." Then it vanished. Perhaps she realized the mask had slipped too far, perhaps she did not want the world to see her like that. But I had seen it, and it told me everything. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet. "It is happening." Amelia continued her work without pause. Every day she updated me with progress reports. The house and boat titles were locked securely under Horizon Trust. The rental apartments were transferred. The accounts were frozen to prevent interference. Each step was another brick in the wall surrounding me, and with every brick I felt steadier. When my mother returned, she would not find comfort or recognition. She would find herself outside, staring at doors she could not open. But even with the legal safety, my thoughts kept drifting to her. I imagined her at the airport, struggling with luggage Richard once carried. I imagined her at customs, swiping a credit card and discovering it declined. I imagined her sitting in silence on the long flight home, rehearsing explanations that no one wanted to hear. It was not joy I felt. It was not revenge. It was the strange weight of inevitability pressing down on both of us. She had chosen this path, step by step, and now the ground was giving way beneath her. The last evening of that week I walked by the river, the wind sharp against my face. Lights reflected on the water, rippling and breaking. I stopped at the edge, staring at the current, and let the sound of rushing water fill my ears. For years I had carried her choices like stones in my pockets. But watching the river move, unstoppable and indifferent, I realized I no longer had to. The current would carry her where it wanted. All I had to do was stand firm. When I returned to my apartment, I found myself whispering to the dark, "You will come back, and when you do, you will see what silence has built in your absence." She arrived at my door without calling ahead. There was a softness in her knock, not timid but stripped of ceremony. When I opened the door, she stood there with a single suitcase and an expression I could not decipher. Not shame, not apology. Just exhaustion, like grief had settled into her bones rather than her face. She said nothing for a long moment. Neither did I. Silence was safer than any greeting. I stepped aside and she walked in as if the threshold might crumble beneath her feet. I showed her the guest room without offering comfort. Clean sheets, fresh towels, a glass of water on the nightstand. She thanked me in a voice barely above a whisper, but I did not answer. I left her there, closed the door gently and leaned against the hallway wall, feeling the echo of her presence seep through the apartment like fog. The next morning she was awake before I was. I found her in the kitchen, standing at the stove with a pan in her hand as though she had always belonged there. Scrambled eggs, toast, tea. It was the kind of breakfast she used to make when I was a child, back when we still pretended to be a family. She looked up when I entered, searching my face for approval. I sat down and ate without speaking. She seemed relieved by even that much. The days settled into a rhythm that felt more like observation than coexistence. She cleaned the counters without being asked. She folded the laundry I had left on the couch. She rearranged the spices in my cabinet with the quiet efficiency of someone trying to make herself useful without drawing attention. I wrote in my notebook every night, recording each action like data points in an experiment, not for evidence, for clarity. I wanted to know if the change in her was real or just another performance. She had lived her whole life on a stage. I refused to be the audience again. One afternoon, I returned from a walk and found her sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by piles of clothes. She was sewing a loose button back onto one of my shirts. Her hands moved slowly, as if unused to such small, meticulous work. I watched from the doorway, unseen. There was no pose in her posture, no glance toward the mirror, no rehearsed sigh of martyrdom, just focus, thread between fingers, stitch by stitch. It was the first moment I believed she might actually be tired of pretending. She found a job 2 days later, night shift cleaning offices. She announced it over dinner in a quiet, practical tone. Minimum wage, long hours, no benefits. I nodded and kept eating. She did not ask for praise. She only said she would leave before dusk and return before sunrise. That night, I heard her footsteps leave the apartment. When she came back hours later, I was still awake. I listened from my room as she set her shoes by the door and sighed into the darkness. It was not the sigh of someone hoping to be heard. It was the sound of someone finally alone with herself. The first week of work carved new lines into her face. She walked slower. She ate whatever leftovers were in the fridge without complaint. Once I saw her rubbing her wrists under running water, the skin reddened from scrubbing chemicals. She glanced at me through the mirror and pulled her sleeves down as though ashamed. I said nothing. Comfort would have been too easy. Pity would have been a trap for us both. There were moments when she tried to speak of the past. Little fragments dropped gently into conversation like testing the temperature of water. "I miss the beach house," she said once while washing dishes. Her voice trembled as if she regretted saying it aloud. I dried my hands and walked away without responding. She needed to learn that longing and ownership were not the same. Yet sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying softly through the walls. Not loudly, not for attention, just a low, muffled sound that made the air heavy. I lay awake listening, torn between memory and resolve. She had once taught me that silence was a weapon. Now I was teaching her that silence could also be a mirror. One morning, she left a note on the counter. Not an apology, not a plea, just a sentence written in unsteady handwriting. "Thank you for letting me stay. I am trying." I looked at the words for a long moment before folding the paper and slipping it into my notebook between the pages filled with her actions. Proof of effort, not redemption. Living with her was like sharing space with a ghost that had not yet decided whether it wanted forgiveness or disappearance. Some days she moved like a shadow. Other days she lingered in the doorway, as if wanting to speak but unable to shape the words. I did not push. This was not about reconciliation. This was about truth being allowed to breathe. One night I found her standing by the window, staring at the city lights. She did not hear me approach. She whispered to the glass, not knowing I was in the room, "I do not know how to be someone who does not destroy everything." The sentence cracked the air between us. For the first time, I saw not the woman who had taken from me, but the woman who could not stop taking, even from herself. I stepped back before she could notice me. I returned to my room and sat on the bed, my hands trembling. I realized then that this was the true test my father had prepared me for. Not winning, not reclaiming, but witnessing, allowing consequence to unfold without interference. She was breaking, and I had to let her. There were moments when I almost forgot she was there at all. Our lives ran in parallel lines, close but never touching. I worked at my desk while she cleaned the bathroom. She cooked dinner while I answered emails. We shared space without sharing presence, and yet something in the air had shifted. The apartment no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a waiting room. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The sun was setting, pouring long streaks of gold through the windows. I paused in the doorway when I saw her on the balcony. She was holding one of my old cameras, the vintage one my father had given me when I turned 16. I had left it on the shelf months ago after convincing myself I had outgrown the need to capture memories. She did not know I was watching. She lifted the camera and took a picture of the sky. No posing, no smile, just a quiet click and a deep breath afterward, like the act itself had released something from her chest. I stepped forward, letting the door creak to announce my presence. She turned, startled. I expected her to apologize and rush to return the camera, but she held it gently in her hands and looked at me with an expression I could not categorize. Not guilt, not defensiveness, something closer to reverence. "This belonged to him," she said softly. I nodded. "I know. She hesitated, then offered the camera to me. I shook my head. Keep it for now, just do not break it. She held it like a sacred object, cradling it close. Later that night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, the camera beside her, a notebook open in front of her. She was writing something. When she saw me, she closed the notebook but did not hide it. Her eyes searched mine for permission to speak. I waited. I have been trying to remember things clearly, she said. Not the stories I told people, but the truth. It is difficult to face yourself when you have spent years pretending. She stopped, unsure if I was listening. I was. She continued. I used to believe that taking control meant never admitting weakness. Now I am beginning to think control might be accepting reality without excuses. Her words did not erase what she had done. They did not soften the past, but they settled into me like rain on dry soil, not enough to bloom anything yet, but enough to suggest that something beneath the surface was still alive. Days passed. She returned from work one morning with a limp. I asked what happened before I could stop myself. She looked surprised that I had spoken first. Slipped on a wet floor, she said with a half smile. Nothing broken. I told her to sit. I brought her ice. She thanked me with her eyes instead of her voice. That afternoon, I left my wallet on the counter when I went out for groceries. I did not do it by accident. I wanted to see. When I came back, it was untouched. She was in the living room reading one of my father's old books. She looked up, waiting for me to accuse her of something. I walked past her without a word. There was nothing to accuse. One night, as I worked late, I fell asleep at my desk. When I woke at dawn, a blanket had been draped over my shoulders. She had not woken me. She had not stayed to be thanked. But the gesture lingered in the air long after I stood up. There was no apology spoken between us. No forgiveness offered. But something had changed in a way that did not need to be named. We were no longer enemies, not friends, not family, just two people existing in the same space, no longer tearing pieces from each other. The next morning, I sat at the edge of my bed, feeling a stillness I had not known in years. Something in me had unclenched. Something in me was waiting. I did not know it yet, but that was the perfect moment for the truth to find me. The morning it happened began like any other. The air was strangely calm, the kind of stillness that makes you feel as though the world is waiting for something to break. She had already left for her night shift, and I was alone in the apartment, the silence settling around me like a second skin. I made coffee without tasting it, then wandered through the rooms with no real intention. I ended up in the closet, where I kept the box of documents my father had left me. I had not opened it since the night I discovered the trust papers. It sat on the top shelf like an artifact, untouched but never forgot. I stood staring at it for longer than I should have, the way some people hesitate before opening a door they know might change everything. My hand rose on its own. I pulled the box down, feeling the familiar weight of it. I told myself I was only checking to make sure everything was still there. That was a lie I did not bother justifying. I set the box on my bed and opened it slowly. The files were still neatly arranged. But beneath them, tucked flat against the bottom, I noticed something I had missed the first time. A small black USB drive, no label, no instructions, just there, silent and waiting. For a long moment, I only stared at it. My pulse quickened in a way I could not control. I did not know why I was afraid, but I was. I picked it up with the kind of care usually reserved for fragile things. It felt warm against my palm as though it had been waiting for my touch. I carried it to my desk and plugged it into my laptop. A folder appeared with 2 files, one video, one document. My throat tightened. I clicked the video. The screen flickered to life. My father sat at the table of the beach house kitchen. The light behind him was soft, late afternoon sunlight pouring through curtains I remembered from childhood. He looked older than I had allowed myself to remember. Deep lines around his mouth. Eyes tired yet calm. He folded his hands on the table and stared straight into the camera. "If you are watching this," he said softly, "it means things have unfolded the way I feared they might. And that means I am not there to guide you through it." His voice was steady but heavy. "Eden, my girl, I know what she is capable of. I have loved her. I have defended her. I have forgiven her more times than either of us deserved. But I also know she cannot help herself when it comes to power. That is why I did what I did. Not to punish her, to protect you." He paused, exhaled slowly. I felt my chest constrict. "You have inherited more from me than property. You have inherited my stubbornness, my instincts, my sense of justice, and I trust you to use those things wisely. But hear me carefully. Do not let justice turn into cruelty. Do not let protection turn into control. And do not let pain turn you into her." My eyes blurred. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. He continued. "There are documents in the second file on this drive. Proof of her attempts to forge signatures, to reroute funds, to transfer property without consent. I collected them quietly. I did not reveal them. I was waiting for the moment she might choose differently. She never did. He looked down at his hands before lifting his gaze again. I did not want you to carry my silence as your burden, so I am giving you the truth. Do with it what you must. His mouth trembled just slightly, not with regret. With something deeper, love mixed with resignation. But before you decide anything, I need you to know one more thing. I did not erase her from everything. There is a separate clause in the trust, one that leaves a portion in her name. It is locked behind conditions. She can only access it if she meets them. He leaned forward as though willing the words to reach me more clearly. Redemption must be a choice, not a gift. If she earns it, she may claim it. If she does not, let it die with her. The silence after his last sentence felt louder than his voice. He stared at the camera for several seconds as if hoping I would speak back. Then he whispered, "I am proud of you. Always." The video ended. The screen went black. I sat frozen, my hands clenched around the edges of the desk. My throat ached. My chest felt too tight for breath. I pressed my palm against my mouth to stop the sound rising in me. It was not a sob. It was something rawer, more animal. I stood abruptly and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the faucet and splashed water on my face again and again until the shock of cold forced me to breathe. I stared at my reflection. My eyes were red but dry. I looked like someone standing between two versions of herself. I returned to the laptop and opened the second file. Pages of evidence stared back at me. Scanned receipts, bank transfers, emails, copies of falsified signatures. My mother's handwriting in places she could no longer deny. Every line was a wound reopening. Every page was a truth I already knew but had never seen written in ink. I scrolled slowly through them, reading each detail with clinical precision. I felt nothing at first, then everything all at once. Rage, grief, clarity. When I finished, I closed the laptop gently. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I stood and walked to my closet. I pulled out a bag and began packing. Not clothes. Not personal belongings. Only the files, the USB, my notebook. I zipped it shut and set it by the door. The sun had risen fully now, painting the apartment in gold. The quiet felt different, not peaceful, not heavy, expectant. I looked around the room once more. This place had been a refuge. Now it was a launch point. I did not know exactly what I would say when I faced her. I only knew there could be no more waiting. It was time to end the silence. I did not sleep after that. Sleep would have been a form of mercy, and I was not in a merciful state. Instead, I waited for the sound of her key turning in the front door. Dawn crept across the floorboards like a slow-moving tide, and I stood by the window watching the sky shift from gray to pale blue. When she finally returned, I heard the soft click of the lock, the quiet shuffle of tired footsteps, the subtle pause when she saw the bag by the door. She looked at me from across the room, confusion knitting her brow. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked. Her voice was cautious, as if she already sensed that something had changed in the air. I nodded once. "So are you. Pack a small bag, only what you need for the day." She hesitated. "Where are we going? To finish something?" She seemed to recognize that pressing further would be pointless. She disappeared into her room and emerged a few minutes later with a small purse slung over her shoulder. She looked at me like a student waiting for instruction. I picked up the bag with the files and walked past her without another word. She followed. The drive to the coast was long and silent. The highway cut through stretches of open land, the sky widening as we moved farther from the city. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window as though the passing scenery might offer her answers. I kept my eyes on the road. I did not speak, and she seemed too afraid to try. When the shoreline came into view, she drew a slow breath, her body stiffening with recognition. She knew where we were going before I said it. The beach house stood just beyond the curve of the road, its familiar silhouette rising like a memory refusing to die. I parked in front of the gate. She stared at it for a long moment, her lips parting slightly. "How?" she whispered. I stepped out of the car and opened her door without replying. She followed me through the gate, her footsteps hesitant on the gravel path. The air smelled of salt and pine. The sound of waves rolled in the distance like a heartbeat. The house looked almost exactly as it had before. Fresh paint, repaired railings, curtains drawn open to let in the light. She reached out to touch the railing as though confirming it was real. Her eyes glistened. "You bought it back," she said softly. I turned to face her. "You never owned it." She flinched, but I did not soften. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. She entered slowly, looking around as though walking through a dream. Her gaze landed on the kitchen table. I had set everything there before we left: the laptop, the printed documents, the USB. She froze when she saw them. Her expression changed, not immediately with guilt, first confusion, then dawning realization, then fear. "Sit," I said. She obeyed without question. I opened the laptop and pressed play. My father's face filled the screen. She gasped softly. Her hand flew to her mouth. He spoke the same words I had heard hours earlier, but hearing them now in her presence reshaped their weight. When he said he had loved her, she sobbed once, quietly, her shoulders trembling. When he said he had forgiven her too many times, she lowered her head. When he said he had proof, she looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. I did not look away. When the video ended, silence expanded between us like a chasm. She stared at the black screen, tears streaking down her face. I placed the stack of printed documents in front of her. "You can read them if you need to, or you can admit it now." She reached out with shaking hands but could not bring herself to touch the pages. Her voice came out in a whisper. "I never meant to hurt him," I scoffed softly. "Intent does not erase action." She covered her face with her hands. I stood watching her. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only inevitability. Finally, she lifted her head. Her eyes were red, swollen. "I know what I am," she said. "I have spent years pretending I was someone else. But I knew. Even when he forgave me, I knew, and I kept doing it anyway, because I did not know how to stop taking." Her voice cracked, even for myself. I waited. She looked at the screen again, her gaze lingering on the still image of his face. "What do you want me to say?" she whispered. "Nothing. Words have no value here." She nodded slowly as though accepting a verdict. She wiped her face, but the tears kept coming. Her shoulders began to tremble. Then she bent forward, folding into herself, a sound escaping her that was not quite a sob and not quite a scream. It was the sound of someone cracking open from the inside. I stood still and let it happen. I had spent my entire life waiting for her to hear me. But now, watching her unravel beneath the weight of her own choices, I realized she did not need to hear me. She needed to hear herself. Minutes passed, maybe more. When she finally lifted her head, she looked older than I had ever seen her, smaller somehow. "He left something for you too," I said quietly. She blinked, confused. I pointed to the final page in the file, the clause outlining the conditional trust in her name. She stared at it, reading slowly, her lips moving silently over the words. Her hand trembled as she held the paper. "He still believed in me," she whispered. "No, he believed in the possibility of you." The difference settled between us like a final judgment. She set the paper down. She did not cry again. She only looked at me, eyes clear now. "What happens next?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "That depends on you." She looked at me as if I had spoken in a language she once knew but had long forgot. Her mouth parted slightly, yet no words emerged. I waited. I did not fill the silence for her. I had spent too many years doing that. Letting her pretend she did not understand. Letting her act confused so she would not have to choose. Now the choice was the only thing left between us. She glanced toward the window. The sea beyond it was calm, almost unnaturally still, like the world itself was holding its breath. I could hear nothing but the faint echo of waves rolling far down the shore. No birds, no wind. It was the kind of quiet that demanded honesty. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt. Not dainty, not theatrical. Just a tired motion of someone who no longer had the strength to maintain dignity. Her voice when it came was low and unsteady. "What happens if I stay?" I took a breath before answering. "If you stay, you do not stay as my mother. That title was spent years ago. You stay as a keeper of this place. You take care of it, you maintain it. And eventually, when it is ready, you open it to others. Women who have nowhere to go, women who were broken by people they trusted. You will serve them, not lead them. Not advise them, just serve." Her eyes flickered with something between surprise and pain. "And if I leave, then you leave, for good. You do not contact me, you do not follow me. You disappear from my life as though we had never met. I will not chase you. I will not forgive you later. It will be done." The room felt tighter somehow, the ceiling lower. She closed her eyes, not to cry, to think. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyelids, not a manipulative one. A genuine weighing of her soul. For the first time, I saw her truly confronted with herself, with no audience to perform for, no mirror to admire herself in, no victim to blame. She opened her eyes again. "I do not deserve to stay here." I agreed silently, but I did not say it. "But I do not deserve to leave either." That answer was not a plea. It was a confession. She looked around the room slowly, her gaze landing on the empty chair across from her, the same one my father used to sit in when he read the newspaper in the morning. Her voice softened. He would want me to stay. I did not reply. I would not let her hide behind his wishes. She looked back at me. Eden, I will not ask you to forgive me. I know you will not, I know you should not, but if there is work to be done here, real work, then let me do it. Let the rest of my life be that work. I watched her. I searched for lies, for a crack in her resolve. For that familiar glint she used to wear when she thought she could charm her way through consequences. It was not there. There was no performance left in her. Only a worn-out woman facing the ruins she had made. You will write your decision tonight, I said. In your own words. Not to me, to yourself. You will sign it. And tomorrow I will either take the document with me or leave it on the table. She nodded slowly. Then she said something I was not prepared for. Will you stay tonight, just until morning? The question hung between us like fragile glass, not a request for comfort, not an attempt at bonding. Simply a human acknowledgement that being alone in this house on this night would be a kind of punishment neither of us needed to inflict. I hesitated. My instinct was to refuse, to draw the line hard and unforgiving. But something in me had shifted since watching my father speak on that screen. He had not raised me to be cruel even when I was right. Justice was not about isolation. It was about clarity, boundaries, truth. I nodded once, I will stay, but we do not talk. She accepted that without protest. The sun was beginning to set outside, casting long amber shadows across the floor. I walked to the hallway and retrieved 2 blankets from the closet. I set one on the couch in the living room. She would sleep there. I took the other and went upstairs to my old room. Felt smaller than I remembered. The walls were still painted the pale blue my father helped me choose when I was 12. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, not lying down yet. I listened to the house breathe, the soft creak of settling wood, the distant murmur of water, the faint rustle of her moving downstairs. I lay back finally and stared at the ceiling. I had imagined this night 1,000 different ways. Confrontations filled with shouting, tearful apologies, collapses into each other's arms. None of that had happened. What existed instead was something stranger. Quieter, more real, not reconciliation, not healing. Just 2 truths finally allowed to stand side by side without one swallowing the other. I did not know if I would sleep, but at some point I must have drifted because I woke hours later to darkness. The moonlight spilled across the floor in a pale ribbon. I stood and walked to the window. The ocean was silver beneath the night sky. Endless, indifferent, free. For a moment I let myself breathe in the quiet. Then I whispered to the darkness as if my father might hear me still. It is almost done. I returned to bed. This time I slept without dreaming. I woke before the sun. The house was still, suspended in that brief moment before dawn when the world feels neither alive nor asleep. I sat up slowly and listened. No footsteps downstairs, no clatter in the kitchen, no sound of movement. For a moment I wondered if she had already left. If she had chosen the easier path, to disappear, to avoid watching herself change, to avoid being held accountable by silence rather than punishment. I stood and walked barefoot down the hallway. The floorboards whispered beneath me. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw her. She was sitting at the kitchen table, awake, dressed, a piece of paper in front of her, a pen resting beside it. She did not look at me when I entered. I approached slowly and saw that she had written a single page in neat, deliberate handwriting. No flourishes, no poetic remorse, just statements. Simple and clear. I read it silently. I acknowledge what I have done. I acknowledge what I have taken. I acknowledge that forgiveness is not mine to ask for and not yours to grant. I accept that my life from today forward has one purpose: to repair what I can and to carry what I cannot repair. She had signed her name at the bottom. Not Mom. Not her married name, just her given name, as if stripping away any identity she had worn as protection. She looked up at me then. Her eyes were steady. There was no pleading in them, no expectation. I asked, "Is this your decision?" She nodded once. I folded the page and placed it in my bag without a word. Then I took the keys from my pocket. There were 2 identical ones, one for the main entrance, one for the storage shed behind the house where my father kept his tools. I placed them on the table in front of her. "This house is not yours," I said. "It will never be yours, but you may live here, not as an owner, as a caretaker. When the first woman arrives at this door, you will open it, you will prepare a bed, you will cook a meal, and you will not tell her your story unless she asks. And if she does, you will not make yourself the hero of it." She nodded again, slower this time. There was a tremor in her breath, but she held herself still. "What about you?" she asked quietly. "I will leave now. Will you come back?" I did not answer. That was not a promise I could make, not a promise she had earned. I walked to the front door and opened it. The early light spilled across the porch. The air smelled of salt and possibility. I stepped outside but paused when I felt her presence behind me. She had followed but did not cross the threshold. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped in front of her like someone attending her own sentencing. She spoke softly. "I cannot ask you to see me differently. I know what I have been, what I have done, but I want you to know this. I am not running anymore." I turned to face her. For the first time, I did not feel anger when I looked at her. I did not feel love either. What I felt was something cleaner. Distance without hatred. Truth without bitterness. A severance without blood. "Good," I said. She lowered her head, not in defeat. In acknowledgement, I walked toward the gate. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. The wind lifted my hair as if urging me forward. When I reached the car, I paused one last time. I could not see her any more from that angle. Only the outline of the house and the reflection of the sea in the windows. I got in and closed the door. The sound echoed through the stillness. I did not look back when I started the engine. I did not look back when I drove down the dirt road that led away from the past. But as the coast disappeared behind me, I felt something loosen inside my chest. A space that had been clenched for years finally opening wide enough to let air in. I rolled down the window. The wind rushed in, cold and fresh. I breathed deeply, not as a declaration, not as a performance, but as instinct, as life. I did not know where I was going next. I did not need to. Direction no longer mattered as much as movement. For the first time in a very long time, I was no longer defined by what I had lost, or what had been taken from me, or what I had been forced to reclaim. I was simply someone who had walked through fire and did not let it dictate the shape of her shadow. The ocean remained behind me, endless and indifferent. The road stretched ahead, unwritten, and I drove toward it without fear.